blocks that they would put on their truck, and they'd cut them to the size that people wanted, 10-cent piece, 20-cent piece, you know, and that's how it was going, you know. And the horses would be pulling the ice, big chunks of ice on those ramps, and they had, what, 10, 15 layers of ice, but with every layer they'd have sawdust, because it would preserve it for the summer months, you know.
The Central Theater was owned and operated by Mr. and Mrs. Henry Sperling.
It was a simple life. You'd go to the movies, your mother would give you 10 cents. They had Saturday movies for kids. You'd go to the movie theater for a dime. If you were lucky, you'd get another nickel for a box of popcorn.
Well, we had a theater in Manville. I think they showed movies, what, 2 or 3 times a week? And my mother used to sing at the theater. They needed a singer in the movie because at that time they didn't talk. So my mother had a job. She used to go get her song sheets in one socket and sing at the theater.
The Central Theater was up on Central Street. Right now is a storage warehouse. So we used to get down there, and they had movies, let's say, 4 nights a week, every Saturday, Saturday, and Sunday. Because if you couldn't go anywhere in the streetcar, you went to the movie, 15 cents, which was great. So we get down to the theater, and it was all a straight floor. I mean, there was no pitch. You had to keep bobbing in between people with their hats. But the French people, Mamé and Pépé, they were in the house. They came from Canada. But Mamé and Pépé only learned French. They spoke French in the house, where the children were working on the street, and they would start to pick up English. There were silent movies. Mrs. Collins would play the piano. Now, if she saw some horses on the screen, well, she banged there to make it look like horses' hoofs, something like that. But the children, they were all silent movies. So if someone said, "It's a beautiful day today," it would be written on the bottom of the screen, "It's a beautiful day today," and you would see the man's lips, "It's a beautiful day today." So the young girl would read it, "It's a beautiful day." Now she would translate that into French and tell her mother. The man said, "It's a beautiful day today," and the mother would say, "Oui, oui." So you couldn't call it a silent movie because we'd listen to the French and we'd listen to the English. So we used to laugh at that. It was funny.
Manville is the first community in the United States to honor its war dead by erecting a monument to the memory of its World War I casualties. This was stated in a newspaper article dated May 30th, 1919.
Senator Lippert from the state of Rhode Island proclaimed that it was the first World War I monument erected in the United States of America. The monument was actually built before the end of the war in 1918. I believe it was basically because of patriotism, being mostly a French-Canadian village. A lot of these old-timers back then and the people that were working in the mills back in 1918 were appreciative of living in the United States. And I think it was the extreme patriotism that they had. So 5 soldiers from Manville were killed in action.
The monument, I remember when they put that up, yeah.
In 1978, the American Legion put an article in the American Legion magazine, which has a circulation of several million in the United States, claiming that we had the first World War I monument in the United States here in Manville, Rhode Island. And we didn't receive any challenges from anybody else. So we're still claiming we have the first World War I monument in the United States of America.
The veterans named the Legion post Alphonse Yell in memory of one of the soldiers killed in World War I. He died on November 9th, 1918, 2 days before the war ended. Ephraim Mandeville's son, Ephraim, served during World War I.
Of course, being a trombone player, a fine musician, he was placed in the band. He never fought in the trenches, but he did go to France. The band would follow the unit. And of course, being a trombone player, he inhaled all the time, so he inhaled the gases. And when he was discharged in 1919, was honorably discharged, he was assistant band leader of the 66th Artillery Band. It was in 1929 that he died. He died of tuberculosis. As a matter of fact, he died at Wallem Lake, which is now Zambrano Hospital. But they claimed that it was because of the gases that he developed tuberculosis.
On December 7, 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, Manville answered the call to arms and once again stepped forward to serve their country.
And I was coming down, and there was an old World War I veteran says, he said, "We're at war, you know." He said, "The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor." I said, "Where in the hell is Pearl Harbor? What's that?" "Well," he said, "that's our big American base in the Pacific." He says, "That's where Pearl Harbor is." He says, "The Japanese just attacked."
When I heard the news, I heard President Roosevelt. He was the president. He said something about dastardly deed that they did. I came home. I told my mother, I said, "I'm going to volunteer." But I wasn't quite old enough. You had to be 18. So I waited till November. My birthday was in November the next year, and I went down and I enlisted. I joined the Air Force from Paddington Air Force Base in England. It's about 20, 30 miles north of London. So we'd leave there, we'd form in the sky. We knew what our mission was, and then we'd fly out as a group, 72 planes.
Frank was a navigator on a B-17 and says his most dangerous mission was bombing a ball bearing plant in Schweinfurt, Germany.
We lost 60 planes that day, and we didn't even land on the base. We just flew back on 2 engines, and we just landed, flew far enough to land on the English coast, in Marsden, I think it was, or Manson. And I tell you, they were falling out all over the place. There was more fighters in the air that day. It's unbelievable. That was the worst one. Flak flies all over the place when you go back. And one came through the fuselage and it hit the toe under my foot. That's boot. I didn't feel anything. I just had a bruise, but I still got it at home. Then I went into mosquitoes, reconnaissance, dropping chaff in front of the bombers, so screw up the German radar.
I landed at Omaha Beach, first wave during the war, first wave. I was driving a half-track. They had 4 machine guns turning 360 degrees for low-flying planes. We're protecting the 16th Regiment of the 1st Army. Yes, I lost my half-track. This is the real thing. My battery commander, 26 years old, he had a little daughter, 6 months old. He never saw her. Never saw her. We left in January when she was born. We went to England, and he was the first one, and they hit the boat direct. 88 hit the boat, everything. I jumped in the water. All I had, soak and wet, my Tommy gun. I was there for 3 days before we could start moving. 3 days. That was tough, real tough. I was landed at Omaha Beach, first wave, and I was in the Battle of the Bulge. I have 5 stars, the biggest battle they had in Europe. St. Lo, Battle of the Bulge, crossing the Rhine.
Life at home in Manville was affected by the war as well.
I remember the air raid wardens and the civil defense people with their helmets and their armbands. I remember that.
It was tough for families, and because we were all on stamps. If you had a car, you had an A stamp for gasoline, which was, what, 3-4 gallons a week? So you couldn't go very far.
We used very little sugar and very little coffee, and consequently you would barter sugar and coffee stamps in exchange for meat stamps. And I guess my mother was very good at bartering, and so we really did without.
Because people had to get in line in Woonsocket for half a pound of butter at Kennedy's, remember? Used to get there in the cold and have to stand in line to get half a pound of butter. So nylons, all that stuff, that was all hard to get.
You couldn't get nylons, so my mother would paint her legs to make them look like she was wearing nylons. Very strange thing, but you know, she did that. We couldn't get butter, so we bought margarines in a plastic bag with a little dot of coloring. So we'd have to sit on the front stoop and massage the bag until the coloring was even throughout to make it look like butter.
We used to go to the community center in Manville. They asked for volunteers, and if you didn't know how to knit, they taught you how to knit. And the first thing we knitted was a scarf, great big khaki scarves for the soldiers. And then after you knitted a scarf, they said you could make a sweater. So you made a khaki sweater. We would meet once or twice a week at nighttime in the community center, and you wore a uniform. You wore a white uniform, and you looked like a nurse. You had that little white thing on your head with the Red Cross emblem and stuff. So it was fun.
They used to make blankets and all kinds of things like that, you know. And the one that was really in charge was Susan Handy. She used to be the one in charge of that. And the woman would go sewing one night a week or 2 nights a week. They, you know, and they would be sending stuff to the soldiers. And
I used to hang around, a friend and I used to hang around, if you want to use that term, the local freight house. That was also the telegraph office. And we would deliver telegrams. Although every once in a while, a telegram would come in, and the gentleman who ran the, Mr. Ogier, who ran the freight house and the operation, would practically turn white. And he would not let us deliver that telegram. He'd put his top coat on, his hat, he'd shut the office down, and he would walk into the village. And it got to the point where people in the village hated to see him coming because he was the bearer of bad news. The telegrams for the War Department, missing in action, killed in action. In fact, one of those that he delivered a telegram for was my father-in-law, Private Marcel Duhamel, was killed on July 18th, 1944. He was in the 115th Infantry, 29th Division. And as close as we can determine, based on the troop movements in France and the date of his death, he died either just before or in the Battle of St. Lo. So he actually died in Normandy. A few years later, when they built they started building the various American military cemeteries in France, his body was interred at the American military cemetery in St. James, France.
I have 6 brothers, and there was 3 of them in the service.
Dorothy's brother Roland died in France in the Normandy invasion.
He was in England about 5 or 6 months before they gathered all the soldiers and all to land in France. And he died. He had just turned 19. The night he got shot, my brother could speak French, and the captain wanted a person that could speak French, so he asked him to take him into town where they could get acquainted with some of the people in France. And as he was driving the captain into town, they had the German who were bombing, and a bomb hit my brother right in the chest. And he died instantly. He never knew what happened to him.
Paul was a gunner's mate on the USS San Juan, a light cruiser.
In one of those gun mounts, there's 13 people in there. I was what they call the shellman. The guy next to me put the powder charge, I put the shell, and I hit a lever that shoots it in the gun. We stopped at the Fiji Island, and the Fiji Island, the captain addressed the crew, and he told us that we were on our way for the first American offensive of the Pacific. We were heading for the landing on Guadalcanal, and in the Fiji Island, they practiced the landing. The Marines would go down the net and into boats and practice the landing. And that night, they had the first battle of Guadalcanal. There was a night battle, and my captain, he was gung-ho. He called the admiral and he says, I request to join the battle because we were protecting the transport, but we could see all the flashes and those big heavy guns. The big heavy gun don't go pow, pow, they go roar, roar. And my chief petty officer, he was nervous, he was going like this here. He says, there's heavy boys out there. We were a small ship compared to that. And they told the captain, no, he says, we don't even know which is the enemy here. It's all mixed up. The next day, 4 of our best ships were sunk by the Japanese. That afternoon, we were attacked by 25 Bettys. Bettys, they were twin-engine Japanese bomber. And the fighter plane went out and intercepted them. The pilot of the Japanese plane was standing on a wing, and there was another guy in the plane with him. The Japanese took his revolver out and shot the other guy, and then he shot himself. He didn't want to be captured.
I was a radio operator. We went all over the Pacific, and we were in Japan for the signing. We were in the flotilla that was going. We were really loading for the invasion when the war ended, and we sailed out of gun range for the Tokyo Bay, and they sent out an order that they had to have white flags on all their gun embankments. As you went to Tokyo Bay, there was like a mountain before you came into the bay, and in the morning it looked like people had their laundry hanging on lines. There were so many embankments, that would have been a very difficult landing to take.
Norman Kanoya had just been assigned as the ship's cook to the USS Bakuna, a submarine stationed in the South Pacific, when the war finally ended.
And I was just going to be assigned fully to that sub. I had my barracks bag and everything. But five days after the second dry run, the skipper told me, Frenchie, we got to send you back. He says, you're a married man, and these boys, I said, I understand, sir. I thank God I made submarine. I said, you know why? I said, I feel in my heart, I'm not sure. But when I go back, I said, I'm going to find out how many others from Manville made submarine duty. There wasn't any. I'm the only man in World War II in Manville that made submarine duty, and made me proud.
My job was radio gunner, and first radio man. You flew in a group. Your group flew together, the other group flew together, and you were somewhat a distance apart so that you wouldn't try not to let the Germans know you're headed for the same target. We got hit plenty times. It wasn't my first time. I got hit in other missions before, plenty. We used to come back. Some of the planes looked like Swiss cheese. Oh, yeah. They're full of holes. My God, you wonder, you say, how the heck this thing flew back.
He had already been decorated with the Silver Star for gallantry in action on bombing missions and had received the Purple Heart for injuries. He qualified for the prestigious Distinguished Flying Cross, but somehow or other he never received this award. On September 20th, 2002, 58 years later, in a ceremony held at the site of Manville's World War I monument, he was finally presented with the Distinguished Flying Cross.
And let me say that while serving in any capacity in the armed forces of the United States, who distinguishes themselves by heroism of an extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. The performance of the act of heroism must be evidenced by voluntary action above and beyond the call of duty.
On February 22, 1944, he was returning from a bombing run over Regensburg, Germany, when his plane, a B-24 Liberator, was attacked and shot down by German fighter planes over Czechoslovakia. He tried to free the ball turret gunner from the lower gun pod, but was unsuccessful.
And in the meantime, I'm on oxygen bottle because I'm away from the oxygen position. So first thing you know, I can't get the thing hardly moving. It wouldn't hardly budge. I'd been hit pretty bad. You know, I was starting to feel kind of faint, so I grabbed my my chute, which had been hit bad, which I didn't know. I just put it on, got one hook on, and I don't remember anything else after that. And I woke up at about 5,000 feet. The chute is like threads, all in one. And I'm coming down so fast from 5,000 feet that, luckily enough, it was like a whole area was all clear snow. And I must have slid and rolled down for about half a mile. It was like a ski run, you know, you would say. I don't know if they were skiing there or not. I never did find out. But anyways, I was just happy enough. I had lost one shoe. I only had one boot, and my throat mic was still on. And you know the funny part thing about that? When I woke up, you know, I would reach for my crucifix, first of all. As soon as that I knew I was floating somewhere, I was gone, like, you know, the concussion and that. And I couldn't grasp it for some reason. And then all of a sudden, I look up, and there's that, and the ripcord is still in there. I didn't dare pull the ripcord. I figured the rest would probably fall apart. So I just let it go, and the first thing you know, I landed so fast. I was just fortunate enough.
2 men from the small village of Pilsen in Czechoslovakia found him in the snow and brought him back to their village, where he was cared for and given medical attention. Several days later, the Germans found out where he was. The soldiers came and took him away to Frankfurt, Germany, where he was interrogated. From there, he was sent to the first of many prison camps.
That's where I went from Stalag 3 to Stalag 4, and then we went to 6. And we were almost in Poland. We were right on the borderline at first. And I'll tell you, one camp there, 4, we could smell when they were burning those Jews and that, and the cow. I'll tell you, if the wind was right some nights, anyway, that you could smell the kind of a smell that the stench that. And it wasn't that far away. It was really maybe 60, 80 miles away.
For 3 days, he was imprisoned in the hold of a ship, crammed in with thousands of other prisoners.
They put us 3 days in the hole there, and there was only a foot of space for each one. There was thousands of us in there. I thought they were going to let us have it then. I thought that was the end. Some of the smaller guys like me, we got on the hull of the ship where there was holes on the beams to make space for others, because everybody had dysentery, and everybody we had lice, and we had and everything to urine in the bucket, and the whole thing. So some of us, a lot of the small guys like us, we get up and hung by a belt. Put the belt, through the hole of the rib and hang up there, and so to make room for others.
On February 5th, 1945, the Nazis evacuated the prison ship, and Ray was among 3,000 prisoners on a 400-mile ordeal through Germany called the Black March.
They marched me from all the way from the Baltic Sea, Stettin. I says, oh, don't tell me. They got us, after running us through the woods, handcuffed with machine guns and and police dogs, and then we had to run in cadence. We were tied to each other, 2 of us, handcuffed, foot and hand. They ran us through the woods, figuring that if we make a mass escape, then they could use an excuse. Well, they tried to get away, and then they'd mow us all down. Well, we lost quite a few, but most of us made it because we kept our heads and just kept in cadence. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And that's how we kept going, you know.
After marching 15 to 20 agonizing miles a day for 86 days, he was finally liberated in Moosburg by the United States Army on April 29, 1945. He had been a prisoner for 14 months and was just now learning that he was the sole survivor of that plane crash. He wanted everybody to know that the medal was for the 10 men who lost their lives aboard the B-24 that day. He received it in their honor and for all those in the Air Force that never made it home. By the end of the war, there were 14 soldiers from Manville that were killed while serving their country during World War II.
Father Boudreau had this idea about building a baseball park and calling it Memorial Park in honor of those who had served in the war. And he spearheaded that entire operation. Got sponsors and he got a donation of the land. And my father was part of the dedication ceremonies, presenting a flag to a member of the American Legion. My sister also was a member of that dedication. She was the flower girl. She would have been maybe 8 years old at the time. And she presented a bouquet of flowers to Mrs. Blais. Mrs. Blais was being honored because she had had 6 sons in the war. So she was very much part of that ceremony. And that was a great baseball field.
My name is Madeline Duhamel Cavallaro. I am pictured here with my mother, Marguerite DeRosia Duhamel, on my right, and my grandmother, Maria Duhamel. The occasion was the unveiling of the Manville Memorial Park Monument on Sunday, August 15th, 1948. Because my father was killed in the war, I was chosen to unveil the monument. On Monday, May 9th,